When I agreed to attend the charity gala with my friend Sarah, I never imagined it would be anything more than a night of free appetizers and awkward small talk. I wasn't the type to blend into a crowd of sleek, designer clad socialites. My thrifted dress, though lovely, didn't scream wealth and prestige. But Sarah insisted, saying I needed to get out more, so there I was, holding a glass of sparkling water and awkwardly lingering by the dessert table. That's when I saw him, Jonathan. At first, I didn't know who he was, just that he looked completely out of place in a sea of pretentious grins. He had this easy charm, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone, even though he clearly could have if he wanted to. And then, before I knew it, he was walking toward me. "Are the desserts any good?" he asked, his voice smooth but warm, like he genuinely cared about my opinion on pastries. I shrugged, a little taken aback that someone like him was even talking to me. I wouldn't know. I've been too nervous to try anything. The cakes look expensive enough to charge for a second glance. He laughed, a genuine hearty laugh that made me feel like I wasn't just some nobody in a borrowed dress. "Expensive desserts always taste worse. Let's test your theory." Before I could protest, he grabbed two of the fanciest looking tarts and handed one to me. I took a cautious bite while he watched, his expression playful. "Well?" he asked. "Dry," I said, and he smiled again, this time with a hint of mischief. "I guess money can't buy everything," he said. We spent the rest of the evening talking. It was easy with him, almost too easy. He asked about me, not the superficial questions, but the kind that make you feel seen. He wanted to know about my childhood, my dreams, and what I'd do if I had all the money in the world. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with anyone in years. It wasn't until Sarah practically dragged me away that I realized who he was. "Do you even know who you've been talking to all night?" she whispered wide-eyed. "That's Jonathan Pierce. His family owns half the city." I nearly choked. "Are you kidding?" "Nope, he's loaded, like private jet loaded." It felt surreal. Why would someone like him spend hours talking to me? Later that week, Jonathan called and asked me to dinner. I hesitated. Our worlds were so different, and I wasn't sure I could handle the inevitable comparisons or judgments. But there was something about him, something real beneath all that wealth. So I said yes, and that was the beginning. What started as an unlikely connection quickly grew into something more. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I let myself hope for something extraordinary. When Jonathan asked me to dinner, I thought it would be a one-time thing. A rich guy amusing himself with a girl from the other side of the tracks. But from the moment we sat down, he made me feel like I was the only person in the room. He asked questions no one had ever asked before, about my dreams, my fears, and what made me laugh. It wasn't just idle chatter, he genuinely listened. His eyes locked on mine like I held the answers to the universe. "I want to know everything about you, Claire," he said one evening, as we sat on a park bench, the city lights sparkling behind us. "You're different, real, and I don't want to lose that." Despite his charm and persistence, I couldn't shake my doubts. "But what about your world, your family? I'm not exactly the kind of girl they'd approve of." Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly, and he looked away, his fingers tracing the edge of the bench. "You're right. They wouldn't. My parents have, expectations. They think that love should come with a pedigree and a trust fund." His honesty stung, but I appreciated it. "So why bother with someone like me?" He turned back to me, his gaze intense. "Because you make me feel alive, Claire. You challenge me. You see me for who I am, not what I have. And that's worth fighting for." And he did fight for me. Jonathan went out of his way to show me that I wasn't just some fleeting distraction. When I hesitated to accept gifts or let him pay for things, he found ways to show his affection without making me feel small. Once he spent an entire weekend helping me repaint my tiny apartment because I mentioned offhand that the peeling walls were bothering me. "See, I'm not just good for expensive dinners," he teased, covered in paint splatters. Those little gestures chipped away at my insecurities, but the shadow of his family loomed over us. I'd hear snippets of his conversations with them when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Words like unsuitable and unrealistic made my stomach twist. Still, Jonathan never wavered. One evening, after months of laughter, late night talks, and stolen kisses, he took me back to the park where we'd first started opening up to each other. The air was crisp, and the city buzzed softly in the background. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. My heart stopped. He opened it, revealing a simple but stunning diamond ring. "Claire, I know my world isn't easy and my family isn't perfect, but I love you. You've shown me what real love looks like, and I don't want to spend another day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, barely able to whisper, "Yes." At that moment, I believed we could face anything together. Little did I know, the hardest battles were yet to come. The estate was like something out of a movie, a sprawling mansion with marble columns, fountains, and gardens so perfectly manicured they could have been painted. As Jonathan's car rolled up the long driveway, my stomach twisted. I didn't belong in a place like this. "Relax," Jonathan said, placing a reassuring hand on mine. "They'll love you once they get to know you." I smiled weakly, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my chest. "You make it sound so easy." When we entered the house, I felt even more out of place. And everything was oversized, massive chandeliers, sweeping staircases, and gilded furniture that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. Staff bustled around, carrying trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres like it was a normal Tuesday. Jonathan's mother, Eleanor, appeared at the top of the staircase. She looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a high society magazine, her hair perfectly coiffed and her pearls glinting in the light. "Jonathan?" she called, descending gracefully. Her tone was warm, but her eyes flicked to me with a glimmer of something colder. "And this must be Claire." "Yes," Jonathan said, squeezing my hand. "Mom, this is the woman I've been telling you about." Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome, Claire. I hope you'll feel at home here." The words sounded kind, but the way she looked me up and down made me feel like I was being appraised. I stammered out a thank you, but before I could say anything more, Jonathan's father, Richard, joined us. He was tall and intimidating, with a presence that demanded respect. "So you're Claire," he said, his tone neutral but probing. "Jonathan's told us a lot about you." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Pierce," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Richard is fine," he replied curtly before turning to Jonathan. "Shall we move to the dining room? Everyone's waiting." Dinner was an elaborate affair, with multiple courses and more silverware than I knew what to do with. Jonathan's siblings, all impeccably dressed and polished, joined us. His sister Victoria wasted no time in asking, "So, Claire, what do you do?" "I'm a teacher," I replied, smiling politely. "I work at a middle school." "A teacher?" Victoria raised an eyebrow. "How noble." I felt the sting in her words, but forced myself to stay composed. "It's rewarding work. I love helping kids learn and grow." Richard leaned forward, his piercing gaze locking onto me. "And do you think your salary as a teacher will prepare you for life in our family? It's not an easy world to navigate." Jonathan bristled beside me. "Dad, that's enough." "I'm just asking," Richard said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Surely Claire understands that marrying into a family like ours comes with expectations," Eleanor chimed in, her voice saccharine. "We just want what's best for Jonathan. It's important that he has a partner who can support him in all areas of life." The rest of dinner was a blur of thinly veiled insults and loaded questions. By the time dessert was served, I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear, but Jonathan never let go of my hand. Every time his family tried to tear me down, he defended me, making it clear that he wasn't going to let them intimidate me. When the evening finally ended, we retreated to the guest room Jonathan had arranged for me. I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and humiliated. "I'm so sorry," Jonathan said, sitting beside me. "They had no right to treat you like that." I shook my head, tears welling up. "I'm not sure I can do this, Jonathan. Your family, they hate me. I'll never be good enough for them." He cupped my face in his hands, forcing me to look at him. "You are more than good enough, Claire. I don't care what they think. I love you, and that's all that matters." His words were comforting, but deep down, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Loving Jonathan meant facing his family's judgment, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to endure it. But as I drifted off to sleep, his arms around me, I decided to try. For him, I would try. The church was breathtaking, its grand arches and stained glass windows glowing in the sunlight. Every detail of the wedding had been meticulously planned, from the towering floral arrangements to the string quartet playing softly in the corner. Yet, as I stood at the altar, dressed in the most beautiful gown I'd ever worn, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't entirely for us. Jonathan smiled at me, his eyes full of love, and for a moment, the grandeur faded away. It was just him and me, promising to stand by each other no matter what. I held on to that thought as the priest led us through our vows. "I do," Jonathan said firmly, his voice echoing in the hushed chapel. "I do," I whispered, my heart pounding as I slid the ring onto his finger. As we walked down the aisle as husband and wife, the guests erupted into applause. The sheer number of people was overwhelming. Friends of the family, business associates, distant relatives. Most of them weren't here for us. They were here because of who Jonathan was and what the Pierce name represented. The reception was even more extravagant. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling of the estate's grand ballroom, and the air was filled with the scent of gourmet food and the chatter of well-dressed guests. Jonathan and I danced our first dance under a canopy of fairy lights, and for a brief moment I felt like we were in our own little world. But reality crept in as the evening wore on. Jonathan's parents, Eleanor and Richard, were everywhere, schmoozing with guests, making sure everything went perfectly, and occasionally throwing not-so-subtle hints our way. During dinner, Eleanor leaned over to me, her tone sweet but her words cutting. "You make such a lovely couple. I'm sure it won't be long before we hear the pitter-patter of little feet." I forced a smile, feeling my cheeks flush. "We're just taking things one step at a time." Richard chuckled from across the table. "Of course, but the Pierce legacy is important. It's not just about the two of you, Claire. It's about the future of this family." Jonathan interjected, his tone firm. "Let's not rush into that conversation tonight, Dad. It's our wedding day." Eleanor patted his hand, her smile never faltering. "We're just excited for you both. The family name needs to continue after all." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The pressure was already starting, and we hadn't even left the reception. I glanced at Jonathan, who gave me a reassuring smile, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being pulled into a world where I didn't belong, a world where love wasn't enough, and legacy was everything. As the night wore on, I clung to the moments that felt real, the laughter we shared with our friends, the way Jonathan looked at me when he thought no one else was watching. But as I fell into bed that night, exhausted from the day, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. This was just the beginning. 2 years into our marriage, I began to feel the weight of the expectations pressing down on me more than ever. What was once a hopeful future now seemed clouded by the shadow of my inability to give Jonathan and his family what they wanted most: a child. And not just any child, a son, to carry on the Pierce name and the family legacy. At first, Jonathan had been so supportive. He would hold my hand and reassure me that we didn't need to rush things, that we'd figure it out together. But slowly, those comforting words began to feel hollow as the pressure from his family grew. I can still remember the first time his mother, Eleanor, made a comment that chilled me to the bone. We were at a family dinner, celebrating one of Jonathan's business successes, when she casually brought up the topic of children. "It's been 2 years now, Claire. You're both young, healthy, and, well, Jonathan is doing so well with the business," she said, glancing at Jonathan with a smile. "It's time to think about expanding the family. It would be a shame to wait too much longer, don't you think?" My face burned with embarrassment, and I could feel the eyes of Jonathan's cousins and distant relatives on me. It was always like this. They never cared about the person I was, only the legacy I was supposed to uphold. I nodded, trying to smile, but it felt like an eternity before dinner continued. Jonathan didn't say a word, and neither did I. We both retreated into a silence that would grow larger over the following months. Soon these comments became more frequent, more pointed. Every family gathering seemed to revolve around my inability to conceive. I could feel their judgment, an invisible force suffocating me. And it wasn't just Eleanor. Richard, Jonathan's father, would sometimes make comments too, albeit more subtly. It's important, Claire, he'd say, his voice measured. The family needs an heir. The company needs an heir. Jonathan tried to shield me from it, but I could see the cracks forming in his once unwavering support. Every time one of them would make another remark, I'd see a flicker of frustration in his eyes, but it was always quickly replaced by the polite mask he wore so well. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, like a quiet storm brewing in the distance. Jonathan, once so understanding, began to pull away. He became distant, both emotionally and physically. I caught him coming home later and later, sometimes staying out for hours after work. I'd lie awake in bed, wondering where he was, what he was doing, but the answers always felt like they were slipping away from me. When I tried to talk to him about it, he would brush it off. I'm just tired, Claire. It's been a busy week. Don't worry about me. But I couldn't help it. I worried. He had always been my rock, my safe place, but now he was becoming a stranger, and I felt so utterly alone. One evening we were having dinner when the topic of children came up once again. This time, it was Richard who spoke, his tone sharper than before. You know, Jonathan, it's been 2 years now, and Claire still hasn't given you what you need. We can't afford to let the family legacy slip away. A Pierce needs to carry on the name. Your brother's son will take over the company at this rate. I could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke, and I looked at Jonathan, hoping he'd say something. Anything to shut down his father's words. But instead, he stared down at his plate, not saying a word. I could see the frustration on his face, and it hit me like a punch in the gut. He was no longer on my side. He was succumbing to the same pressure that had been choking me for months. I didn't wait for him to speak. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and I left the table without saying another word. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get out of there, away from the weight of their expectations. I found myself in the garden, standing under the stars, my breath shallow. The cool night air did nothing to calm the storm inside of me. I could hear Jonathan's voice behind me, but I didn't turn around. Claire, he called softly, but there was something different in his voice, something distant. I'm sorry about what my father said. Don't apologize, I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. It's not just him, it's you too. You're letting them win. You're letting them make us feel like we're failures because we haven't given them a child. You said we'd do this together, Jonathan, but now it's like I'm fighting this battle alone. There was silence behind me, then a sigh. It's not like that, Claire. I'm under a lot of pressure. You don't understand what it's like. I spun around, my heart pounding. I understand more than you think. I'm the one who's supposed to be good enough, Jonathan, but I'm not, and every day, it feels like I'm less and less of the woman you married. I turned and walked away, not waiting for him to respond. My chest was tight, my head spinning. I was losing him, slowly but surely, to a force I couldn't fight. The next few weeks were a blur. Jonathan and I barely spoke. His family's pressure was becoming unbearable, and it was eating away at him. I could see the resentment building in his eyes every time he looked at me. He no longer saw me as the woman he married. He saw me as the reason he couldn't live up to his family's impossible standards. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty cup of tea in front of me. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I couldn't even remember the last time Jonathan and I had a meal together at this table. He was always working late or avoiding me altogether, and I had grown tired of pretending that everything was fine. The tension between us had reached its breaking point. Every conversation seemed to spiral into an argument, each one harsher than the last. But tonight, something felt different. When Jonathan walked into the room, his face set in a grim expression, I knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. Claire, he began, his voice cold and detached, we need to talk. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever he was about to say. What is it now, Jonathan? Another lecture about how I'm not doing enough? His jaw tightened, and he avoided my eyes. This isn't working. We're not working. I blinked, the weight of his words sinking in. What are you saying? He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with frustration and something else I couldn't quite place. Defeat. I think we should get a divorce. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at him, hoping he would take it back, that he would tell me this was just another one of our arguments. But his expression didn't change. You're serious? I whispered, my voice trembling. He nodded. Claire, this marriage, it's not what it should be. We're supposed to be building a family, a legacy. That's what my parents expect, what I expect. But we've been married for 2 years and we still don't have a child. It's clear that. That what? I cut him off, anger bubbling up inside me. That I'm the problem? That I'm a failure because I can't give you a son? That's not what I'm saying, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Then what are you saying, Jonathan? I stood up, my hands shaking. Because all I hear is that I'm not good enough for you. That I never have been. Your family never wanted me. And now you've finally decided they were right. He ran a hand through his hair. This isn't just about my family, Claire. This is about us. We're not happy. You're not happy. And neither am I. I laughed bitterly. You think this is going to make me happy? Being tossed aside because I couldn't live up to your family's ridiculous expectations? I'm not tossing you aside, he said, his voice rising. I'm trying to be honest. This isn't working, and it hasn't been for a long time. Maybe it's better if we go our separate ways. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You're a coward, Jonathan. You promised me forever, and now you're giving up because things got hard. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. We both deserve a chance to find happiness. I stared at him, my heart breaking into a million pieces. This man, the one I had loved so deeply, was standing in front of me and telling me that our marriage was over, that I wasn't enough for him, and no matter how much I wanted to fight for us, I knew in that moment that it was pointless. Fine, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If that's what you want, then I won't stop you. Let's get a divorce. He looked at me, surprised by my response. Maybe he had expected me to beg him to stay, to plead for another chance, but I couldn't do that. Not anymore. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, he said after a long pause. We can work out the details. I nodded, unable to say anything else. He left the room, and I sank back into my chair, the tears finally spilling over. I cried for the love we had lost, for the dreams we had built together that were now shattered. I cried for the woman I had been before I met Jonathan, the one who had believed in fairy tales and happily ever afters. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, determination. If Jonathan didn't want me, then fine. I would find a way to move on. I would rebuild my life, piece by piece, and prove to myself that I didn't need him to be whole. This was the end of our marriage, but it wasn't the end of me. The conference room was oppressively silent, save for the faint scratching of a pen on paper. I sat across from Jonathan at the long, polished table, flanked by our respective lawyers. The divorce proceedings were moving forward at a steady pace, each clause and asset division discussed in painstaking detail. I tried to focus on the documents in front of me, but my mind was elsewhere, on the life growing inside me. I'd only figured it out after our last fight. I hadn't told him, not yet. The timing had never felt right, and a part of me wondered if he even deserved to know. But as the lawyer representing me cleared his throat and leaned forward, I realized the moment was no longer mine to control. Before we finalize the terms, my lawyer began, his voice calm but firm, there's one more matter to address. Jonathan glanced up, his brow furrowed. What is it? My heart pounded in my chest as my lawyer continued. Claire is pregnant, Mr. Edwards, approximately 8 weeks along. The room felt like it froze. Jonathan's eyes widened, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words. Pregnant, he finally managed, his voice low and almost trembling. Is this true, Claire? I nodded, my throat tight. Yes. For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell me? I folded my hands in my lap, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Because I didn't know how to, and because it doesn't change anything. Doesn't change anything? His voice rose slightly, a mix of frustration and desperation. Claire, this changes everything. We're going to have a child. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Now it matters to you? After all the things you said to me? After you threw me aside because I couldn't meet your family's ridiculous expectations? He flinched, but his expression quickly hardened. That was before. I didn't know, Claire, I was wrong. I can see that now. Can you? I shot back, my voice shaking with emotion. Because from where I'm sitting, you only care because now there's something at stake. If I wasn't pregnant, would you be sitting here looking at me like that? Or would you just sign those papers and move on? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze dropping to the table. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, before he finally spoke. I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but I want to make things right. For you. For our child. I stared at him, searching his face for sincerity. Part of me wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that he could change, that we could salvage what was left of our marriage. But the other part of me, the part that had been broken too many times, refused to fall into that trap again. It's too late, Jonathan, I said softly, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. You can't undo what's been done. You can't erase the things you said, the way you treated me, and you can't make me forget how it felt to be discarded, like I didn't matter. His hands clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white. Claire, please, don't do this. We can figure it out. We can— No, I interrupted, shaking my head. We can't. I'm done fighting for something that only breaks me. This baby deserves a better version of me, not the one who's constantly trying to prove her worth to a man who never saw it. He looked like he wanted to argue, to plead his case, but the words didn't come. Instead, he leaned forward, his tone desperate. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our child. You already did, I replied, my voice firm. When you chose to walk away, you made that decision for both of us. Jonathan looked like he had been punched in the gut, his shoulders sagging as the weight of my words hit him. I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about me, about my future, and about the life I was determined to create for my child. The lawyers exchanged glances, sensing the tension in the room, but wisely choosing to remain silent. I took a deep breath, gathering the strength to stand firm. I'm signing the papers, I said, reaching for the pen in front of me, and I suggest you do the same. Jonathan hesitated, his hand hovering over his own pen. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, that he would drag this out in some misguided attempt to win me back. But then, with a resigned sigh, he picked up the pen and signed his name on the dotted line. It was done. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope for the future. Jonathan had made his choice, and now I was making mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my own destiny, and that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give to myself and my child. Leaving wasn't easy, but staying would have been unbearable. After the court finalized everything, and with Jonathan's signature barely dry on the papers, I packed what little I needed and left the rest behind. There was no need to linger in a place filled with so many broken memories. It was surreal watching the city skyline shrink behind me as the plane climbed higher. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness, but it wasn't for the life I was leaving. It was for the girl I had been, the one who had tried so hard to make something work that was doomed from the start. My destination? A quiet coastal town in another country, somewhere Jonathan or his family wouldn't think to look. It was a place I'd read about years ago in a travel magazine, with turquoise waters, sandy beaches, and little shops lining cobblestone streets. It sounded like the perfect place to start over. The town was even more beautiful than I imagined. As soon as I arrived, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The air was fresh and carried the faint scent of salt water. My new home was modest, a small cottage with white walls and blue shutters that looked out onto the ocean. It wasn't the grand estate I'd once lived in, but it was mine. Every corner of it felt like a fresh start. The first few days were quiet, almost unnervingly so. I was used to the noise of Jonathan's world, the constant hum of voices, the ringing phones, the clinking glasses at endless social events. Here the loudest sound was the waves crashing against the shore. It took some time, but I began to relish the stillness. With my settlement money, I didn't have to worry about any expenses ever again, but I still wanted to have a career of my own and a life. I started looking for freelance work, leaning on my background in marketing and communications. At first, I worried my break from the workforce during my marriage would hold me back. But to my surprise, clients valued my creativity and dedication. Slowly but surely, I built a reputation taking on small projects that allowed me to work from home. Each day felt like a tiny victory. I'd wake up early, make a cup of tea, and work on my laptop at the kitchen table as the morning sun streamed through the windows. The baby bump growing beneath my sweater was a constant reminder of why I was doing this, why I had to make this work. One morning, as I sat on the porch watching the ocean glisten under the sun, I felt a tiny kick. My hand flew to my stomach, and tears filled my eyes. "You and me, kid," I whispered, smiling through the tears. "We're going to be just fine." Jonathan tried to call, of course, several times actually, but I never answered. I changed my number, deleted old accounts, and kept my address private. There was no room for his apologies or his explanations in this new chapter of my life. He'd made his choice, and now I was making mine. The town was small enough that I quickly became familiar with the locals. There was Maria, the elderly woman who ran the bakery down the street and insisted on giving me free pastries whenever I walked by. There was also Jules, the kind but gruff fisherman who told me which beaches were the best for finding sea glass. They didn't ask many questions, and I was grateful for that. To them, I was just Claire, the new woman in town, and that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel more like myself, or maybe a version of myself I'd never known before. I was no longer Jonathan's wife, or the woman trying to fit into his family's impossible mold. I was just me. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. I decorated the nursery with soft blues and greens, painting waves on the walls with my own two hands. Each stroke of the brush felt like a step toward a brighter future. I couldn't wait to meet my baby, to hold him in my arms and show him the life I was building for us. Some nights, I still felt the sting of betrayal, the echoes of Jonathan's cruel words ringing in my ears. But those moments were fleeting, replaced by the steady rhythm of hope and determination. I wasn't running away from my old life anymore. I was running towards something better. As I sat on the beach one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized how far I'd come. The person I was before, the one who would have begged Jonathan to reconsider, who would have fought tooth and nail to stay in a marriage that was breaking her, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. With my hand on my belly, feeling the life I was about to bring into the world, I whispered into the twilight, "We're going to make it, little one. Together we'll create something beautiful." And as the waves washed up on the shore, I felt at peace, knowing I'd left the past behind and was ready for whatever the future held.